Today, I want to talk about WebGoat Guy's um, a video he made on hexagonal cities. Now, I don't want to call myself an expert on city design. I just thought the video was super interesting, and it was a good premise. I think it was a little abstract, which, again, this is not a knock on the video. The video is cool, and I love that guy's channel. But I just wanted to have a little bit of a different approach. So I figured, shout out him because he gave me the idea, but then this is my idea. So the argument in the video is a very tempting one to use. All four of them, rather. I think one is more of a graph theory problem. I think the last one he uses in the video to calculate the average path in between two nodes on a graph. And also the arguments he was using in terms of reachable distance. But I think the visual logic kind of gets in the way. Is still pretty abstract. And I think there's a lot of resources available to look at traffic signals, utilities, emergency access, like city planning, 1,000 other terrible constraints that not considered because, again, the video is more of a premise, which, again, like I said, pretty cool. So I wanted to give the hexagon my best possible argument because I am a big hexagon fan. So I think what we would do is let's start with the nicest version of my argument. I guess not even the most nice, but just very pro hexagon. I would say you would take, let's say, each block. So take a hexagon, take a square. That area is going to be the same. And all we want to worry about is the perimeter required to enclose a certain area. And so for square with some area A, the perimeter would be 4 times the square root of the area. And for a regular hexagon, meaning all the edges and angles are equivalent, it would be approximately 3.722 square root of the area, which we can you can derive however you want to derive. What we can do is we can take the ratio, and so this will be around a 6.94% boundary saving. And this isn't just some random calculation. We can look at Hale's proof of the honeycomb conjecture in the description, but in my research, not our. And so Hale's proof of the honeycomb conjecture is if you divide a plane into equal area regions and minimize average perimeter, the regular hexagonal honeycomb is optimal. And so if I wanted to write the fanciest version, it's this: if you partition the plane into equal regions, then minimize total boundary length per unit area, it would look like this. And so this is just an equation that the hexagon wins. So as a boundary minimization problem, now this is a little still abstract, and so I'll get to the meat and potatoes later. But I think this is also something that'd be neat. But if my argument were to be only a equal area boundary minimization problem, this would be a very short video. So I'm going to explain this equation. I'm recording this after editing everything together, just because I'm realizing now that I did not explain this equation at all. So omega sub I is just referring to any partition or cell, right? It just pretend it's a city block for this example. And then the partial of omega, it is assume that's the boundary of the cell. And so this would be like the center line of each street, or just it's just to denote like here's where they meet in the middle. So assuming each cell has one directional road, the other cell would have the other directional road, and they would meet. And so what H1 is just the total length of all of the lines. So all road mileage, everything. So this would be curb length, piping, whatever we're trying to calculate. And then B sub R is the city boundary, and then the absolute value is the total land area. So B sub R is just think of it as a circle with radius R expanding toward outward over some metropolitan area, and then the absolute value is denoting the total surface area of land inside that circle. And so when we take the sum, when we divide the sum by the total surface area, we're trying to find infrastructure density. So how much asphalt you need per square mile of developed city. And so then what I'm realizing now, what we've forgotten is a half. And so that 1/2 is just to say it's to avoid double counting, because each edge will share a street. And so when we're minimizing in terms of cells, we're trying to find a layout pattern that would yield lowest possible infrastructure density. I know this is a little boring. Like I said, you're going to have to bear with me. But this is how we would figure out a pro hexagon benchmark. In terms of infrastructure cost, and this relates to packing problems, hexagons would be optimal according to this. The 6.94% efficiency that we calculated relates directly to this equation, just very simplified. And so since we are, this does ignore junction delay and whatever is happening at each vertice and all traffic conflict points, pedestrians, etc. So when optimizing strictly for this limit, hexagons do win. But since cities are a network of moving traffic, we want to continue on, because, like I said, not just a boundary minimization problem. So just a slight tangent before I continue on. I'm not going to do a diagram because I'm lazy and I've already said way too much. Basically, another argument that will hide this trade-off for a boundary minimization problem is just saying that, hey, if we have each block with p sides and q blocks meeting at every vertex, assuming perfect tiling, right? You would have p over q vertices per block, right? And so for squares, that would be 4 over 4, right? And so then that would mean we'd have one vertice per block, which makes sense because, it's each four-way intersection. That's your one vertice, right? But for hexagons, that would be 6 over 3, right? 6 sides, and then 3 blocks at every vertex. So it would be 2 vertices per block, which makes sense because, yes, we have the 6.94% less shared edge length, right, from the packing problem. But in ideal tiling, it also gets twice as many vertices per block. So less edges, more junctions. So I think that is something to keep in mind for the rest of the video as I continue talking. So this first image up here is Nolan Cauchin's Hexagonopolis. And I got these next few images from a very, very interesting, and I highly recommend you read it. It's Hexagonal Planning in Theory and Practice. Ben Joseph and Gordon. They it's they did a really neat job of kind of summing up a lot of what you would want to know if you were thinking about hexagonal planning, as one does. Um, so this first image here is Nolan Caution. So the idea with this is he was the first head of Ottawa Town Planning Commission, and he designed this to try to tackle urban congestion through a philosophy he called organic city planning. And so organic, just like architecture, organic, like planning anything, is like it is a verified and I guess tested way to approach design problems. I think it's neat, but the idea with this is Kaushan created these hexagonal grids pointing north, so no building is entirely north facing, and so this would maximize sunlight for public health. This grid would handle low speed and local traffic with three-way junctions, so direct collision points would be minimized. If you think about, like, if you get T-boned, right, it makes sense because the only way that shape is possible is because you're approaching at a 90-degree angle. Just something to think about. And so these thick lines that you see in the hexagonopolis is what he called these interceptors, right? And so these form larger, like, macro hexagons, and they were meant to be grade separated. So they'd be like high-speed expressways passing underneath or above the surface level for long distance traffic across metropolitan areas rapidly. And so the large circular hubs at the major vertices are the traffic orbits. So these were effectively meant to be roundabouts, a little more complex from what I remember. And so those would be the only entry and exit points that would connect like the residential cells to the high-speed interceptors. Now, it's interesting to think about. It's a neat design, all in all. If you want to think about, I mean, I saw in the comments of the video that I'm, I guess, quote unquote, responding to. I'm not really a response, but yes, it's cool, but it's an example of what I was trying to say, what I was starting to say about the junction problem that we were about to encounter. And so he's manually engineering a solution to any potential traffic delay. So doubling vertices per block, like I said, it would bring a standard road network to a halt. Your mean waiting time per junction would shoot up. And so he has a hierarchy. So if we looked at that and we looked at some micro simulations, forcing all vehicles to travel through tight traffic orbits to shift between grids you would encounter turning delays. So we would have to look into what exactly would the pros outweigh the cons? Would the time saved with the honeycomb outweigh the traffic delays? So what surprised me really was this isn't just some modern internet like geometry, geometry slop, but Ben Joseph and Gordon they traced a whole history of hexagonal planning. So like early 20th century planners really did propose hexagonal street systems as serious alternatives to rectangular grids. If you look at this, these are two different plans, rather. One is a layout proposed by Charles Lamb, an American architect. where he wants perfect uniform hexagonal honeycomb tiling with subtriangles and smaller trapezoidal subblocks to fill the interior of each major hexagon, leading towards central specialized hubs, parks, whatever. He proposed this for the same reason that we argued earlier, because of the perimeter density efficiency of a honeycomb, and it would cut down on linear footage of water mains, gas lines, sewage pipes. Um, it's it, it again. It is his was directly influenced by the perimeter like only argument that I was bringing up earlier. And then this second one is a geometric plan proposed by Judge Augustus Woodward to rebuild Detroit after a fire in 1805. It was inspired by Pierre Charles L'Enfant's layout for Washington. I hate French people, by the way. His layout, Pierre dude, his layout for Washington, D.C. And the main idea here is a triangular and hexagonal grid iron system that creates, again, more nested equilateral triangles and regular hexagons. At the center of these geometric configurations sit massive circular grand plazas or roundabouts, same thing as Charles Lamb. And this is also, again, same thing with the route directness. So we're trying to get, they're recognizing the angular penalty, right? That, oh, look, if you have, if you have to turn, 120 degrees at every junction, and you run into problems. You have to wait twice. You have to wait twice at each junction, assuming you have a red light, right? For example, and you have to wait twice at each junction, and before you turn. So, even in a standard square grid, if you wanted to go diagonal, like in the hexagonal grid, it's up and down. In a square grid, it's diagonal. If you want to, if you provide these like radiating avenues, one at 30, 60, and 120, right? Your circuity, which we will talk about, I will explain circuity. You want to keep your circuity is, and I think in WebGoat Guy's video, he talks about it, is how close to a straight Euclidean distance between point X and Y are you trying to get between cross-city trips? And so, unfortunately, this plan failed because it broke because of real-world real estate constraints. Unfortunately, splitting city blocks into triangles and trapezoids created like kind of odd property sections. And so since we traditionally build properties in an orthogonal fashion, which who knows is efficient or not, the construction at the time was inefficient and it was prohibitively expensive. And that's why that ended up failing. Yes. Okay, so now we're back to the intersection. So this is one of the stronger arguments for hexagonal streets, not just the perimeter, but the intersection. And so when we have a hexagonal street network, there's three-way junctions, where a square grid produces four-way junctions. This really is just important, and the only reason I bring this back up is because I want to talk about the traffic conflict points, because they grow very, very fast when you add more approaches, and is why just spamming a bunch of streets won't really work as it comes, like from a timing perspective. This is from FHWA, their signalized intersection guide. It's very simple geometry. You can see the paths traced and see where they intersect. And so what is just really important is we're just trying to figure out how many conflict points does a trip experience, and how much delay does each one create. Really, what's more important is this first one that I had up, because it shows the diagonal approach that would be seen in a three-way junction with hexagonal cells. So this is where the problem is less like it's not. This is why I was saying that the visual argument kind of breaks down, and this is what that was my favorite part, I guess, of the WebGoat guy's video of the integral at the end where he took the average overall possible trips. I'll throw up a similar one up here, and I'll flash it again when I bring it up. But here I'm going to use street network images because we want to treat street networks as nodes and edges, so that we can evaluate routes, circuity, orientation. I mentioned circuity earlier. And so here's the Frontiers Manhattan and Barcelona maps. It's a nice visual bridge because you can see the historical street graph instead of just like cells. The question is not really like, does this look nice, but how far do you have to travel compared to straight lines, the Euclidean distance? And so in my synthetic model, I took around 6,000 origin destination pairs with network X. And so then the mean circuity was, I think, very tied almost, for around 1.264 for the square grid and about 1.264 for the honeycomb. If I want to say that mathematically, this is what I was talking about. I'll throw it back up. And so this is just the average overall trips, and this is route directness. So the square grid will have its diagonal penalty, but the honeycomb smooths part of the middle, but it would still punish certain directions. Citywide like routing would have to be some kind of distribution, and not just a single route. I'm once again stepping in just to explain this equation, just because I realized I kind of threw it up there and did all of my calculation off screen. Yeah, guys, I did some calculation off camera. So omega would represent the entire geographic shape of the city. It's just like the surface. And again, the absolute value bars would just represent the total surface area. And so then when we do those double bars, just again in layman's terms, it's the Euclidean distance or just the straight line distance between x and y, just the shortest geometric distance possible between two coordinates. And so then when we look at d sub g, right, that is the network distance. So you take x and y, like how far you have to travel if you're actually on the path. So it's a little more involved for hexagons than it would be for square grids, because square grids you can treat as Cartesian coordinates. It's a little easier. Now, I won't bore you guys with the math, but eventually both calculations, the mean calculations, I think average out. I did calculate it a little differently than WebGoat guy's video. I can post calculations if anyone really cares. But yes, and so then this is just a simple double volume integral. So it takes every single point as a potential origin, and then every single potential destination is why it's a double integral. And then you have to normalize it because you're taking a volume integral, so you need to it's not actually volume. It's kind of hard to, it's a little abstract, but it's two it's two domains that are representing space. So it'd be one domain times another, and so that doesn't work out. So that's why you're normalizing by the total area squared. Um, and so you'd average that out, and you'd get a dimensionless just ratio just based on mean average circuity. But yeah, so I just wanted to come here explain. Just I'm realizing post editing. So next up is this is just a screenshot of me running a simulation on my computer. This is probably my favorite part of this entire exploration. Um, I posted some of this on my GitHub, but most of the code base is pretty sloppy. But I think the stuff I posted is enough to get a grasp of how this works. But I have a honeycomb sumo scenario, and so I pushed this model through Sumo. It's just an open source microscopic traffic simulator, and it's kind of just a stress test. Um, it completely random trips. You have actuated traffic lights, and it just does a calculation of route length, duration, waiting time, and time loss. So at around 1,200 trips, the honeycomb results in a shorter mean route length. So honeycomb around had a 894 meter route length, and the square had a 1015 meter mean route length. So around a 12% distance win, but it actually was 34% slower. So 156 seconds compared to Square's 116 seconds, which I think we can attribute to the double junctions that we were talking about, how every block will end with two junctions if we were doing the math, right? So less length, more waiting. So the mean waiting time at a junction or not at a junction, at a trip, ended up being 36 seconds of waiting compared to Square's 10.9 seconds of waiting. Now, in terms of just travel time, this does reduce the difference, and so there may be optimizations to be made regarding waiting, but the junction issue still is something to think about. So the way I would summarize this whole argument is we're going to have some kind of cost function, and generally this is what I see. You have some constant times L, which I will attribute to length of road, and then we'll have some constant J, some constant times J, and J will just be junction delay, like mean junction delay, or some value for junction exposure that'll be relative to the rest of these. Some constant times C, which we can give to construction costs or maintenance, and then some constant B, which is going to be like feasibility, like buildings is what why I said B. But yes, like if you have a trapezoidal or triangle construction, how feasible is that? And so the honeycomb, as we established, the length factor is way down, and conflict points in junctions is way down because of the simplicity of a three-way junction. But junction encounters per vehicle would increase, and the buildability would be a little more complicated, not because it's inherently complicated, but because, like I said earlier, the standard for building is orthogonal. So there's no like best way to. This is a very abstract, and it kind of. I'm avoiding what I wanted to say earlier, which was like I want to be very specific, but I'll get to that. Um, I think an abstract kind of like eye test is interesting to look at. Um, obviously rectangles maybe survive because of the cleaner look. Um, it's the status quo. Um, and so I think the real question is why haven't we building hexagonal cities um, before we answer the efficiency question? Because I think efficiency is really dependent on pre-existing infrastructure. Um, they it's very easy to subdivide with rectangles, right angles. It's very easy to make stuff repeatable. Um, it's really just a coordination convenience. Um, but I think in this day and age, I'm not really sure if that's a worry anymore. Um, I think the hexagon is very interesting. Um, I think the abstract version isn't even wrong necessarily, even though we have evaluated certain aspects of it. But I think there's just some incompletion with, okay, we have to think about, okay, routes, different intersections, delay, how you're building around the hexagon. Um, and I think it's just, there's historical backing. If you look at these designers, it's not just some random doodles. This is very like, it's been thought out. Um, but I think it really, the idea should be to use hexagons more in just city planning. Maybe not even necessarily the roads, but I think it is a very good option. It's a design problem that's like kind of enveloped by some larger optimization problem. Um, yeah, so why are cities not hexagons? And also, what parts of the city are what assumptions can we make such that the hexagon actually wins? And are these assumptions true? Um, I will really quickly provide some more mathematical evidence, mostly just straight from literature, and then we'll wrap this video up because I have been yapping for way. Um, so here is just another mathematical result, just giving the hexagon my one last stronger case, because I think the only two that I really provided were the circuity and the perimeter, which I still think the perimeter, even though I gave a very simplified explanation, I think is pretty strong. But just in case, this is a paper by Conway and Sloan, and they're talking about the optimal two-dimension quantizer. So this is an information theory problem, but it's very easy to map to like a city. So if you scatter service centers across those were air quotes, by the way, across a uniform plane, send every point to its nearest center, and then you minimize average square distance. Um, the centers would end up forming a hexagonal lattice. At least that's what the literature says. And so a triangular pattern where the nearest center regions are regular hexagons. And so for equal area square and hexagonal surface regions, the normalized second moments are going to be this 1/12 for square, and then this number for a hexagon. So a hexagon, all this is saying is a hexagonal arrangement would lower mean square distance to the nearest center by around 3-4%. So that's like an average result. And then the worst case result is, I think, an even stronger argument, assuming each service region has some area A with one facility at its center. The farthest point in a square is it's pretty easy. You just have to find the diagonal. I'm not going to write this math up because either you go figure it out, make your own video, or whatever. Screw you. The farthest point on a regular hexagon is going to be the square root of 2 times the area over 3 root 3. Again, why? Who knows? You take the ratio of those two. Again, remembering that A is just some area constant. You'll end up getting around a ratio for hex to square of around 0.8774. This is similar to the perimeter ratio that I brought up at the very start, but the worst case scenario is around 12.26% closer in a hexagonal region. So that's one argument, and then we can take an even stronger, like coverage theorem. This is from Kirschner, and the most economical way to cover a plane with equal circles places their centers on a triangular lattice. Once again, whose nearest center regions are regular hexagons. So if every facility has some radius r, and square placement can assign at most 2r squared, assuming like with an area of a circle, and a square is your service area. But then on a hexagonal region, it's very similar. It's going to be 3 root 3 over 2 times r squared. So this is around 29.9% more territory per center than a square placement. Now, the circle isn't necessarily abstract. I think if you were to think about any given like resource, like a post office, like you want, or what else? What stuff that matters? You got to go to the grocery store. You're looking at a circular coverage area, and so, like I said, so if you flip the ratio, right, you need around 23% fewer coverage centers than a square placement. So this is less infrastructure, around a quarter less. So it's something to think about. And so if we go back to Ben Joseph and Gordon, their Cauchon's comparison also calculated separately roughly around like a 10% less street and utility length for hexagonal plan. Again, that was more design specific, but it's in a similar direction as perimeter and coverage. Now, coverage arguments would assume some uniform, constant demand across an entire metropolitan area, which is not true. It's population spikes in areas. And this is completely ignoring landscape, highways, zoning laws. But a part of a city design, the part that I didn't mention there, and that's for a reason, is where the pro hexagon case, you can't really avoid when you look at the necessities. So this includes health clinics, schools, fire stations, radio cell, any system that requires nearest possible access. And so, again, a complete honeycomb street plan may be excessive, but if you have uniformly spaced services, which again, with systematic racism and class divisions is again in an ideal scenario, and even in some unideal scenarios, I know the math is pretty hard to, I think. Um, I don't know if I just made a load of bullshit or I was cooking with some of my arguments there. This was not too well put together. The research I did was real. I did more research than I would like to admit. But I kind of just wanted to. I needed to get started on something, and so I think releasing something is going to motivate me to make more and be a little more, make it a little cleaner. Not because I was definitely thorough, but yeah. Thank you guys for watching. I'll be out.